Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So it's been a while, a few weeks since I've done a video. I've been real busy working on the pole barn project, and the point of today's video is first I want to catch you up on some progress, and then we're going to talk about siding and some of the prep involved in getting ready to put siding up. So stick around and we'll get started. Alright, so one of the main things I've been working on in the past few weeks is soffit. And I think in the previous video I talked about how I'm using my own southern yellow pine boards, and these were sawn, oh gosh, year and a half ago or so, and allowed to dry. And I went through and pulled out any twisted boards, and I was left with gosh, a couple hundred really nice straight flat boards. I ran these through the planer to get them down to 13/16 thick, smooth on both sides. And then in that previous video you saw me start to run them up the gable end, these short lengths, and then I came back and worked on these evens with soffit venting, and you know, there's a whole lot of ways to do soffit venting, and I talked about some of that in the last video. What I ended up doing here, this is really a very custom soffit. You'd probably normally only see this on high-end homes where someone's crazy enough to pay for it, but in my case I'm dumb enough to put an insane amount of labor into cabinet quality soffit, which is what we end up having here. And so I've got you know, these southern yellow pine boards running lengthwise. I've got a steel mesh product called Quick Mesh over here, and then I've just got some trim blocks every 2 feet to cover up the underside of the rafter tail so that you don't see them when you're looking up through the mesh. And this turned out really well. I was thinking as I was doing this, I would never attempt this with store-bought lumber because the quality is just not there. But you know, when you make your own lumber, when you can go through and, you know, pick out the cream of the crop, and you can plane it, saw it, trim it up yourself, size it. You know, when you have full control over the lumber, you really can get very high quality results. And you know, that's what happened here. This isn't so much my craftsmanship. This is starting with really good lumber. It lets you be more ambitious with your styling and your work, and you know, the end result just came out great. It looks like $1 million. Even though this was free lumber, I saw it basically on my own sawmill here at home from trees I already own. Okay, it's really hard to beat that in terms of low cost and going towards a really high quality result in the end. And this has 2 coats of stain on it. I put the stain on before the boards went up just to make my life easier later on. And so this is pretty much complete at this point. I will come back at a later date, put up fascia on the edges. Right now we just have sub fascia, which is more that southern yellow pine, and I'll come back later and do fascia. But the next thing really I want to move on to with this project, mainly to get it closed in for the winter a little bit more, is siding. And so we can start to talk about siding prep here. Alright, so if you watch my channel, you know that I produce a lot of my own lumber and siding from southern yellow pine trees on my property. And in fact, I've done a lot of projects where I side buildings with fresh sawn green lumber using the board and batten technique, and that's really ideal for green lumber. This project's a little bit different. I'm going to be putting up house wrap and insulating this building, and you really don't want to put up green lumber as siding against the house wrap, really for 2 reasons. One is that that lumber is going to have a hard time drying if it's up against a house wrap. It's going to dry differently on each side. And then the second problem is mold and mildew, which is a big risk when you put green lumber up against house wrap. And so, you know, when I've done board and batten in the past with green lumber, I always put that up against open wall girts so that both sides of the board are exposed to air. It can dry gracefully, minimize issues with cracking and splitting, and not, you know, flirt with any problems with mold or mildew. So that's not going to be possible here. So I ended up buying my siding, and this is about a $4,000 stack of eastern white pine siding from Hancock Lumber out of Maine. And these are 1x12s. They have a textured finish, and this kind of board is called a S1 S2E, smooth one side, 2 edges, and then the remaining side They run it through a planer that, instead of having a smooth knife surface, it has a really jagged knife surface, or in other cases they'll have a wire brush surface. And what that does is puts a nice rough texture on the outside face of that siding. It makes it take paint and stain really, really well, and gives it a really nice rustic look. On par with rough sawn lumber, maybe a little bit more catchy and architectural looking, just because it's got a rougher texture, and it looks, you know, even more rustic than you know, bandsaw marks that I'd normally get in my siding. So this is going to be going up in the next few weeks, and before you can you know, throw siding up, there's a whole lot of prep, especially with a pole barn. In fact, this kind of gets into the area where you start to see disadvantages of the pole barn method versus stick framing. So let's move the camera around and talk about some of those things that needed to get done before we can put up this siding. One of the things I like to do with a pole barn that's going to be insulated is to come around and insulate all the corners and all the posts with a 1.5 inch thick foam board. This gives you R7, and the reason you want to do this, you know, if you come in and you put insulation up against the wall from the inside, which I will also be doing, that's great for the open sections of the wall where your insulation comes out to, but you've got all these posts that the insulation really doesn't encapsulate. Wood by itself, if you're lucky, you'll get R1 to maybe 1.2 per inch, and so for a 6x post, you know, you might get about R7 insulation just from that wood. But you know, a 6-inch wall, normally you insulate that to R19, and so wherever you have posts, wherever you have corners, you're going to get a cold spot where the insulation is going to drop to about R7. And one way to really minimize that issue and almost eliminate it is to put a foam board on the outside, and that'll take that post from R7 up to about R14. Makes a big difference. It really eliminates cold corners, cold posts, and it helps the building retain heat and cooling much more efficiently. So I like to do that. Really all I do is I cut these pieces on the table saw and miter saw to fit, try and get them tight, press them in between the wall girts here, and I just put in you know, 1 or 2 2-inch roofing nails, just enough to tack it in place. You know, in general that's not needed because I'm fitting these foam boards in tight and they stay there by themselves. But what I found a couple years ago, you know, if it's windy like it is today, if you're working with a nail gun that shoots out a blast of air, it can knock these pieces around. So I do like to nail them. And this foam board is crazy expensive. It's about $45 for a 4x8 sheet. If I had my druthers, I would put this completely in all the spaces between the wall girts. You know, it would be all the way across these openings as a really good outer layer of insulation, but it's really not practical cost-wise to do that. You know, unless you don't have a concern with budget, it's going to be too expensive to insulate with this everywhere. But when you put it just on your posts and you fill in, you know, little gaps, it goes very far. I think I got basically 2/3 of this building insulated like this out of one sheet, and I had to go buy another sheet to do the rest, and then I'll, you know, tuck it in any other places where I can't push in the fiberglass insulation easily from the inside. So this is crazy expensive if you were going to do it everywhere, but strategically, if you're just trying to bump up the insulation value of your posts and improve the thermal management in your corners, this stuff goes very far, and that's a really great way to make use of it. So the next thing I want to talk about is some of the additional framing I needed to do, and we'll move the camera over on the inside and talk about that next. All right, so I've been building pole barns for years. I really learned how to do this with an Amish crew who are just experts in pole barn construction. They're really smart. They've gotten generations of experience gone into the way they build pole barns, and I'm just a huge fan of the pole barn technique, especially if you're working alone, because you can put up a building pretty quickly all by yourself, just because it's a great great method, and it's real amenable to using the structure to square itself up and make progress. One of the disadvantages, I think, of pole barn method compared to stick framing is that when you get to things like windows and doors and openings for maybe air conditioners, they end up being kind of like afterthoughts. And this is an example. I'm going to be putting transom windows on the two eave walls of this building. I really would have liked to have 3 or 4 windows per wall. But windows are super expensive, and so I'm just going to do 2 windows per wall because they're mainly going to just be used for ventilation, when I don't need to run heat or air conditioning. So, when you got your posts and your wall girts, that's part of the simplicity of the pole barn structure. You got vertical posts, you got horizontal wall girts that knits your frame together. That's really all you need. But when you come back and you want to put in windows and doors and other openings, then you have to kind of bastardize the pole barn method and go off and deal with custom dimensions. Okay, you might have some odd size window, a certain size door. I got an opening over there for an air conditioning unit that I'll show in a second. Those are dimensions that are independent of the pole barn method. They have nothing to do with pole barns. They're set up for some reason specific to the windows, the doors, or the air conditioning, right? So when you get a pole barn, you got to come back and really box in an opening for those custom items. And normally that's going to involve adding extra wall girts. And so you can see this is one of the original wall girts on my 2-foot spacing. Well, to box in this window frame properly, I had to add girts below and above that, and then basically saw a chunk out of that original girt where the window's going to go. And this is not too complicated. Normally what I do is I build these boxes ahead of time and then clamp them up into place, screw them to the girts, and then make any cuts I need to open things up. But this is one of those things where when you do it, you're like, boy, this is really inefficient. This is where stick framing, you plan that stuff ahead of time. You've got headers and jack studs and things like that to frame out the openings, and all that stuff comes out in the wash. With the pole barn method, this is extra work. It's a lot of weird cuts of lumber, shortcuts. It's wasteful, and it's just not a clean thing, but it's one of those necessities. Hopefully, if you look at the overall cost and the overall simplicity versus complexity of the pole barn method, you can accept these things. But whenever I have to do this, I'm like, I'm cutting a wall girt, I'm putting this weird shaped, weird sized transom window into place that was really never intended for a pole barn, and it starts to get a little bit crazy. So that's one of the things you have to do really before you put your siding on, because you need access from the outside and the inside to frame this out. So this is one of the transom windows. We'll move over and I'll show you a couple of the other openings next. All right, so here's another opening. This is the opening basically for the man door, the entrance to this this structure. And what I did just to line things up and try and make things semi-architectural was really I lined up the transom window on this wall. You can see that's up above the door. Just to, again, I'm only doing 2 windows per wall to save money, but trying to make it look decent and not ingrown. And so that worked out to me, putting one of these transom windows right above the door, centered. So we've got our door opening here, transom window up there. That's another boxed in frame that was built ahead of time, clamped up in place. And then the door openings, I almost always try and put these next to one of the main posts for the building, which is here. This is one of the original posts, in fact, when this was a timber frame carport. And so I tried to take advantage of that, making this one edge of my door opening, and I basically just put a 2x up against it with shims to make it nice and straight. And then I put a new post, a shorter post. It doesn't have to go up all the way to form the other side of that door opening. And then it's a matter of coming back and putting in some kind of a header. And this is more of that box framing. And then before you do any of this, of course, you need to kind of know where your floor is going to be. And so a lot of that I have to plan ahead of time so that I can size garage door openings, make sure there's enough vertical space, enough headroom. And so based on where the concrete slab will be, you can then cut down a little bit into your skirt board, and that defines the bottom of your rough opening. And so here you have it. Here's the door opening. Now let's move over and talk about the last one over on that back wall. All right, so here's our last opening that I have framed in. This is going to be for a PTAC unit, which is a really wall-mounted heat pump. It can do heating and air conditioning, and it's also got backup resistance heat for really cold weather. And these are great units. I have one of these in my workshop. They're great units for garages and barns because it's really self-contained. It's simpler than a mini split system, and if you don't need any of the advantage of a mini split, which is basically to be able to separate your indoor and outdoor units in different places, this is a great way to go because in one package, pre-charged with refrigerant, you have heat pump that does heating, cooling, everything you need. So these tend to have a pretty standard 16 by 42 opening. That's what I boxed in here. They normally weigh 120 to maybe 150 pounds, and so in this case I've got the original wall girts up top here and down here on 2-foot spacing. I added a 2x6 below this opening just to help support some of the weight of this unit, and then another 2x4 up above to come down and frame out that 16-inch height. And so this is going to be where the PTAC unit goes. It's on the back of the building where nobody's going to see it. Nobody's really going to hear it when it runs. And I picked this location mainly because just the layout of this building, heating and cooling that flows from here is going to have a pretty good chance of filling the building evenly over time. And what I'll probably end up doing, and this will be in a future video, probably in several months, I'll put a thermostat on one of the far walls just to be able to control what this unit does when it's installed. So that's really the last opening for the PTAC. All right, so here we are on the one of the eave walls, and you can see again, here's one of my framed out, boxed out openings for one of the transom windows. And the whole idea of a transom window is it's up high. It's really well sheltered by the overhang. The windows I'm going to use, they will tilt in so I can open them for ventilation, but otherwise it's just going to be a raised up, more of an architectural style window that hopefully will look good. The next step and what I was hoping to do today is really to put up house wrap, put the windows in and flash them, and then start throwing up the siding. The siding goes really quick once you start moving along, but that's going to have to wait for another video because it's crazy windy today. We got gusts up to about 40 miles an hour, and I just know if I even attempt to put up house wrap when it's that windy, it's not going to go well. House wrap's pretty expensive. I don't want to get it all wrinkled up and crumpled up trying to fight the wind. So I'm going to hold off on that for today, and that'll probably be the next video. But you can see again, I've got my insulation here in the corners. I've got it on the posts, and I'm ready at this point to put the house wrap up on this wall. I will cut it, tuck it into the window openings, put the window up, and then use some flashing tape. And I will probably show that in the next video just because that's kind of interesting. Everybody's always interested in how certain people flash windows. I do it differently, whether it's a pole barn or a house. Some people get really specific and nitpicky how they flash windows in. But for a high window, really close to, really protected by an overhang, we don't have to be too picky here. So it's really going to just go on top of the house wrap and get some flashing tape. So I'll be covering all that in the next video as soon as the wind dies down. Hopefully tomorrow, we'll see. So until then, as always, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Take care.